this is David Bernstein. I am founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. This is the Jewish Contrarians podcast. And this week we're doing it a little differently. The usual suspects aren't here. Brandy's not here to do it with me. But I'm really pleased to have Brooke Weiss. Brooke is a activist, and she'll describe her role herself with Moms for Liberty. And I know that you've all heard of Moms for Liberty. It's certainly been in the news lately. The Southern Poverty Law Center called it a hate group. And then there was in the Jewish world where I'm monitoring and part of, there was sort of a Twitter firestorm about Moms for Liberty also being anti-Semitic. And so I did a little digging on some of those issues. And rather than just sort of write something about it, I figured it would be a good idea to talk to one of the lead activists who happens to be Jewish and is connected to the Jewish community to talk about her own experience with Moms for Liberty and what she stands for and what the organization stands for. So Brooke, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Awesome. So Brooke, tell us, first of all, about yourself. How did you become an activist? Where are you from? How did you become an activist? Give us your personal story.
I am from New Orleans, but I currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am married to a retired police officer, and I have 3 daughters. 2 that already graduated from the public schooling system, and 1 that is getting ready to start her junior year. So I got involved with Moms for Liberty during the COVID lockdowns when my daughter was actually asked an anti-Semitic question on an assessment for an English language arts class. She came to me in the middle of this assessment with her computer screen and showed me this question and asked me if I was okay with it. And it was basically a question that compared slavery to the Holocaust. And the correct answer was that slavery was worse than the Holocaust because it lasted a much longer period of time. And so I was horrified by the presentation of this question, because there's no value in comparing 2 atrocities to each other than to possibly pit 2 groups of people against each other. So I wanted to get into the school to see the rest of the assessment. And it took me more than 2 weeks and it was a considerable challenge to be able to do that. And so I became acutely aware of the lack of transparency. And this was it was February of 2021, and Moms for Liberty started in January of 2021. And I heard one of the co-founders on the radio and thought, maybe this lady can help me, because I was still trying to get into the school to see the rest of the test. And our chapter, the Mecklenburg chapter, was the 12th chapter to launch. We now have over 300 chapters in 45 states. So.
Wow. Okay. So you got involved, and tell us about Moms for Liberty in its own words. Like what is the mission? What's the scope of the work?
Sure. So Moms for Liberty, we empower parents, we bring awareness, and we fight for parental rights at all levels of the government, state, local, state, and federal. Really, the only thing that's happened at the federal level is one of our co-founders testified in front of Congress when the DOJ was weaponized against parents, and parents were declared domestic terrorists. We do most of our work at the local level, but many states have now engaged at the state level as we've grown. And here, for example, in North Carolina, we have 18 chapters now. Really proud of that. And we held our first legislative day and are currently lobbying for some bills.
All right. Now, Moms for Liberty, like a bunch of other organizations, including my own, Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, emerged around that same time, that winter, spring 2021, to push back against the ideological encroachment of the left, particularly what you might call woke ideology in schools. And yet, when I see what Moms for Liberty does, sometimes I'm not sure if it's a quote unquote anti-woke organization, or if it's a socially conservative organization. How do you see any distinction? How do you characterize that?
So at a national level, they do not tell us what to do. Each chapter is its own true grassroots organization, and we determine what are the causes that we want to work on. In the beginning, most of us just wanted schools opened. We recognized that our children were being harmed, being locked out of schools. And so once the schools were open, then we worked, a lot of us, on getting the masks off of our children, because we recognized that was harming children too. And since then, we've really dug into curriculum. And I try not to use terms like CRT and SEL and woke, because those are such general terms that people don't really understand what they mean. And the way I define it may be different than, other people define it. But we really, most of us don't like the idea that children are being lumped into groups strictly based on their skin color, and that they're being labeled as inherently racist if they are born white, and that there's nothing that they can do to change that. And basically all other races are perpetual victims. They're being taught to live in this constant state of victimhood. We also work very hard to bring awareness to literacy rates. The national report card, this last one that came out, indicated that 2/3 of American children in the 4th grade cannot read at a proficient level. Here where I live in Charlotte, it's considerably worse than that. 9% of the children in our district can read at a proficient level, meaning that 91% of them cannot. And that is unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. So in addition to bringing awareness to that, we want to work, to change that. Something that I have initiated and will be working on is bringing back the teaching of cursive. It is actually part of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade state standards here in North Carolina, but it's not being taught anywhere. And the teaching of cursive is really important to special needs children that have dyslexia and dysgraphia. It's also really a wonderful learning tool for all students in general. So those are kind of some of the things. A lot of chapters, mine included, are working on making sure that age-appropriate material is in the school libraries. I know that's a big national issue. We at Marshall Liberty are labeled as book banners. And I always like to address that issue. There is a difference between curating a children's library and an educational library, and book banning. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although it doesn't mean that some people, in the name of curation, might not go too far, and we can talk about that. But and let's start there. Let's go through some examples and talk about them. So one of the examples that caught some national attention is when, I think it was a chapter in Florida, I don't think it was the national organization, tried to have the graphic version of the Diary of Anne Frank moved from, I think, an elementary shelf to a middle school shelf. And that was, of course, problematically, I think, deemed book banning. I mean, if that's your definition of book banning, I think it's kind of crazy. But still, this is the Diary of Anne Frank. It's not, it's not Gender Queer, the book that's gotten so much national attention. Tell us what your thoughts are, and also I'm curious to know, is that just a local chapter doing the local chapter thing in their own way? Or is that the national organization really getting behind them to do that?
The national organization certainly supported them in that effort, but not just each chapter, but each member we empower to protect their own parental rights. So our view is that parents have a fundamental right to raise their children according to their own values. The government doesn't give us that right. It's a God-given right. And so we believe that parents have the ultimate decision as to what type of material their children are exposed to. So no, the national organization didn't put that out there and say, hey, we think this book needs to be in middle schools, let's go after this. An individual parent made that decision. And I can speak about, my point of view, and I do believe that it doesn't belong in an elementary school. I don't know how many people are familiar with this graphic version.
I think I have it right here.
Yeah.
I might have moved it to the other room, but I actually, when the controversy emerged, I ordered a copy and looked
Me
through
too.
it and found,
So it's very different than the original version that came out. And her father is the one that released that, and he made deliberate decisions to leave certain parts of it out. And it was not until after his death that the version that is represented in that graphic novel was released. And there are parts of it specifically about her sexuality and some experiences that she had that he didn't want. He didn't want the public to know about. And so I think that was the objection. Of course, I can't speak to the parent, but that was the objection. There are some situations, sexual in nature, that are brought up in that book, and she didn't feel like she wanted her child to be exposed to that. And so, we support her decision to believe that way and make that decision, and think that parents ultimately should have the decision as to what their children are exposed to. I can speak for my chapter. We don't ask for books to be removed. We do ask for certain books to be deemed limited access, and that parents opt into a system where their child has access to those books. It's still something that we're currently working on with the policy chair and the superintendent to come up with a reasonable solution that works for everyone. But my chapter has not. We're accused all the time. I walk around and I'm well enough known in the community. People say things to my face, you're a book banner. And I eagerly look forward to the opportunity to speak with people that are willing to speak with me to clear that up. I have actually never filed a single challenge at this point. I have had numerous discussions with school board members and the superintendent actually on her own independently decided to pull 2 books that I brought to her attention, but I didn't ask for that.
Yeah. So I want to sort of probe a little bit more about this idea that individual parents. And look, I think we all agree that school systems can't be completely at odds with the sensibility of parents, and that at the very least, in some cases or a lot of cases, there should be opt-out provisions allowed for parents who are uncomfortable with the curriculum. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and many Muslim parents are right now pushing back against sort of the teaching of this class on gender in our area, and are insisting on the right to opt out, and they've been denied that right to opt out. So but it seems to me also that schools ultimately they're public schools. They ultimately have to come to some sense of what they're going to teach, and there's not at least in my estimation, an unlimited right of any individual parent to say that offends me or my sensibilities, so therefore that can't be taught in our schools. I think there's certain things that are always going to be taught that are going to have some aspect of narrative or consensus. Are we really going to say every parent gets to decide for their own kid what they can learn in a public school, which is actually for the collective?
So I think there's a general parents are not aware of what is happening in the school systems right now. We've been asleep at the wheel, and we've been sending our kids off to school and trusting this institution and believing that what is happening inside those walls is the same thing that happened when we were in school. You're doing timetable drills, and we have been under the impression that it was just core academics, learning to read and write, learning arithmetic, learning the scientific method, learning, civics and American history. And when the lockdowns happened and we had the computers in our homes, those were literal windows into the classrooms. And many parents became aware of the fact that there was a lot more going on that they didn't know about. And so school now, in many people's opinion, has overstepped boundaries. Many people believe that it's a parent's place to teach values and not the government's place to do that. And, you know, we share many common values as Americans, but also, you know, based on religion, things are different. Like you brought up Muslims are not just in Maryland, but, you know, all over the place are upset about some of the gender stuff that's going on. And so I, for example, became aware of the fact that Charlotte Mecklenburg schools are socially transitioning children without parents' knowledge. And so I filed a public records request, got a hold of the gender support plan, and was able, through school documentation, to show parents that, yes, this is happening here. Most people think it's just happening somewhere else and not in their own backyard. And so I have a real problem with, you know, with secrets being kept from parents. And like I said, I experienced firsthand more than 2 years ago, the lack of transparency. I think that trust has been broken, and maybe some things aren't as bad as parents think, but I am totally aware of the fact that there are things going on inside the school buildings that parents have no idea. And so I don't think that it's those core subjects, you know, math, science, reading, that parents are objecting to. It's the additional stuff that schools have taken on, you know, teaching that sex is not binary, teaching values. I mean, I know that in my daughter's classroom, there was a pro-choice poster in the teacher's classroom, and things that said, you know, we believe is that's a religious, you know, statement. And so politics are being brought into the classroom, and that, I think, is what parents object to and don't want happening. They don't want a teacher's personal politics and beliefs pushed on to their children, because certainly, for example, my family were pro-life, and so that statement in the classroom, we believe, and then, you know, a pro-choice statement, made my daughter feel unwelcome, you know, afraid to voice her own opinions. And that's the kind of things that that parents are opting out of, want to be able to opt out of.
I understand. Okay. You know, there's been some other accusations around Moms for Liberty and anti-Semitism. I just want to make sure we touch upon them. One was that a chapter, I can't remember which chapter, you'll tell me, I'm sure, had this quote from Hitler. Now, I don't think we need to go too deep into this, because it was very apparent to me when I read it that they weren't using the quote to sort of praise Hitler, but rather to suggest that what was being taught to kids was Hitlerian. But, you know, I don't know that we want people comparing every little problem in the schools, and there are problems in the schools. I mean, I agree with a good part of what you're saying about what those problems are. I might not agree with you on everyone, but I'm sure we agree on a good many of them. I don't want that still to be called Hitler. It's just, that's extreme.
Right.
What is your take on that? How did that play out at Moms for Liberty?
Sure. So Paige, that was her first newsletter that she ever put out. She was new. Yeah, I think quoting Hitler was probably not a great idea. But that quote that she used is similar to a lot of other quotes that Marxists and communists, you know, there's that famous Lenin quote, "If you give me your children for 4 years, I'll plant a seed so deep that nothing else will ever grow." And it was basically the same idea. She was trying to bring awareness to the fact that there are some movements, like the gender one that I told you, Charlotte is socially transitioning children without their parents' knowledge. There are some efforts in some places by a limited number of people to drive a wedge between children and their parents. And that is a Marxist tactic. And so that's what she was trying to bring awareness to. I don't think she did it in the best way, but she's new, and we are just mothers. Many of us have never been involved in politics before. We're not polished speakers. There is a large learning curve. So within the organization, we've given her grace and tried to help her through and learn. Unfortunately, on a national level, she has not been afforded that grace, and her words and things have been twisted. So I don't think it was a good idea, but it was a mistake. She immediately apologized.
Right. So let's continue. I completely understand. Let's continue to let's move on. A former colleague of mine who's not a fan of Moms for Liberty and has texted me all kinds of things, said that in his community, there are rallies or marches in which Moms for Liberty has marched side by side with Proud Boys. Is that true?
No, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I would ask your friend, where did he get that information? Did he see it firsthand? Does he have pictures and documents? Because there is no partnership between Moms for Liberty and the Proud Boys. We have never marched with them. That doesn't mean, however, that there's not some person out there wearing a branded shirt or something like that that is participating in things. We have 300 chapters in 45 states. So I'm sure there are some bad apples within our organization as within any other organizations, but there's never been a Moms for Liberty endorsed anything with the Proud Boys.
Right. The same person who told me about that, and I did share a photo, but I couldn't really make it out. It just looked like a bunch of people marching. Also shared with me a meme that was on some social media channel that had the Conference of Moms for Liberty, and below it suggested that Jews were responsible for the transgenderism movement, or some language to that effect. Is that something that Moms for Liberty is broadcasting?
No, I know what you're talking about because I brought this up with one of our co-founders, and she explained to me that happened on a Telegram channel. It is not us. They post a lot of our podcasts and information, but that is absolutely not us. And there have been multiple efforts to report that Telegram account and have it shut down. But that is not us. We're accused of all sorts of things all the time. Almost daily, I see social media accounts that are created, fake accounts to represent us. Some of this is done with malicious intent in order to make us look bad. I think some people think that they don't realize that we are an actual nonprofit. We have bylaws. There's a process. They might just think they can call themselves Moms for Liberty, or they might think if they're following us on social media that they're a member. There is actually a process to become a member, but the one that you're talking about is an unofficial Telegram channel.
Got it. So the Jewish journalist Jonathan Tobin, he's editor of the Jewish News Syndicate, wrote a piece really in defense of Moms for Liberty recently, and he started, he said in that piece, Americans and Jews of all political stripes need to think clearly about this crisis in the schools. And then Moms for Liberty tweeted out the quote, and it was suggested by some in the Jewish community that Moms for Liberty is actively making a distinction between Americans and Jews as if they're not American Jews. And this was a sort of a statement that Jews are not real Americans. Was that the intent of that?
Absolutely not. I think it was a direct quote that was taken from, what he wrote. And so absolutely not. We have invited many Jewish speakers to both of our national summits. We frequently engage with Jewish people. Absolutely not. Not just Jewish people, but everyone. We are all the time accused of being an arm of the Republican Party and things. We are a nonprofit organization. nonpartisan. We do have members from all political backgrounds. We don't address political issues, the really divisive issues like abortion or immigration or, we focus on education. And when you can do that, there's not much that many parents disagree on. In the Jewish community, especially in the Orthodox community, there have been attacks on, for example, the yeshivas in New York. New York State is going after the yeshivas as saying that they're not, because they focus on religion and not academics, that they're a violation and not teaching children what they need to know. So we partner with all sorts of people, but the idea that Jews are not Americans, that's not, there are all sorts of people that say that, accuse Jewish people of, being pro-Israel or not having allegiance to America. So no, that's not something. I think the quote was taken directly out of Rabbi Tobin's writings himself.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't see direct evidence of anti-Semitism, certainly from the national organization. As you said, maybe there are bad apples. Okay, they're bad. Maybe they're bad apples, but there are some acts that have given me pause, and not because they're anti-Semitic, but because they seem to me potentially radical. And someone shared with me a meme or a picture of a protest of Moms for Liberty outside sort of a youth LGBT center that probably also was dealing with transgender issues, gender ideology issues, and so forth. Now, let me just say that on the one hand, I'm concerned about gender ideology and that it stifles legitimate discourse around topics that we need to be able to talk about. We should be able to talk about the role of trans women in sports. We should be able to talk about so-called gender affirming care, which is certainly being challenged in European countries and is not, and seems to escape all scrutiny, at least as far as it pertains to minors in the United States. So I think that there are legitimate concerns around this, and yet I'm to protest outside of a group of maybe high school students who are just talking to each other, that seems extreme to me. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know which event you're talking about. I can speak about my chapter and all of the other chapters that I'm aware of. I have personally participated in a protest outside of a clinic that performs surgeries on children. This clinic used to have pictures on its website of double mastectomies that it performed on a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 16-year-old. So
is this in Boston or is
this
is
in Charlotte?
Okay.
This is in Charlotte, and I have protested outside of that clinic. I am not aware of any efforts to target or protest children. We want to be able to do what you talked about, have civil discourse and have conversations. And in America, that's not happening right now because people with views opposing this stuff being pushed on children are being shut down. People that oppose the surgeries and the hormones to minors are being shut down, and they are not allowed to speak. They're being taken off of Facebook. Their YouTubes are being deleted. I know I'm shadow banned. I used to get thousands of views and clicks and likes and stuff. Now I'm lucky, to get 20. So the discourse is not being allowed to happen. And I think there's a very distinct difference between children and adults. And things are happening inside schools that parents do not know about. That we just want to be able to have a conversation about that. It's important. And like you said, it's not happening right now. And Europe is reversing course on many of those things. And unfortunately, that's not happening here. We can't even have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And if you
So what?
do, if you do disagree, have an opposing view with the national narrative, then you are immediately labeled a homophobe, a bigot, a racist, a Nazi. You know, they don't try to defend their position or have a respectable conversation. They just immediately resort to labeling you with these horrible pejorative names. And that is what's happened to Moms for Liberty, you know, right now. Many people have a very big misunderstanding about what we represent. And so just because you think that double mastectomies on 14-year-olds are not okay, and a school socially transitioning your child without your knowledge is not okay, does not mean that you don't have tremendous compassion for children that are trying to figure out who they are.
Right.
I've been
Okay.
through this with my own children. And
Yeah, I know. I have too.
yeah.
And okay, that's clarifying. Thank you. Last question I really wanted to ask you, and you know, we've talked about, you know, the 300 or so chapters. I mean, it's an incredible growth in 3 years. We actually, or 2 years, we actually saw this during the civil rights movement, when there were a lot of organizations that were popping up everywhere, and in order to keep up with what was happening and to have an impact, they sort of franchised very quickly. They gave individuals and organizations franchises so that they could expand and they can make the maximum impact nationwide. But of course, the downside of that always is that you have very little quality control. It's very, very localized, and that people are acting in your brand name in a way that might imperil the brand. And I'm wondering if the organization at the national level has really thought through that and tried to put in guardrails in place, or that would prevent some of the excesses from happening. Because that, I mean, there's no way you can have 300 new chapters in a way that would allow you to sort of control for some of the excess that might take place among certain people or certain groups. How are you struggling with that dilemma?
I appreciate this question so much. So yes, we exploded onto the scene, and our growth in the beginning was much more rapid. And the co-founders became acutely aware of exactly what you're talking about and slowed down, took a pause. Basically, when my chapter was the 12th chapter in the nation, at that point, I had a phone conversation, and, you know, we joked about this at the last summit. Those of us that have been around for a lot longer than the other chapters, they kind of just were, you know, on the phone, like, okay, that's great. Mailed us a couple of constitutions and we're like, go for it. There's a much more in-depth screening process now, and onboarding process now, very detailed process. So we screen our new leadership. When my chapter started, there was no process to get your bylaws together. And now they guide you through, you know, all of that. We have trainings that we can attend, not just online through Zooms and things, but in person. I have a member that's going to a training in, is it August or September? In Florida. You know, we just got back, just wrapped up about a little over a month ago, our annual summit, where it's 4 days of, you know, intensive training. So yeah, there's a lot more attention paid because of exactly what you were talking about in the very beginning, and some of the stuff that, you know, we're still being talked about in a negative way happened in the beginning, you know.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been fascinating. I really appreciate it. I think I want to call it like sort of Moms for Liberty in their own words, because I think there's so much that commentary about it. And look, you're an organization, you're a movement. You're not immune to scrutiny. In other words, people can critique you, but at least they should critique you for what you're actually doing and saying, and not for what's attributed to you falsely.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful that we've had this conversation, and I hope we'll stay in dialogue.
I appreciate it too, more than you know, because we unfortunately are not given this opportunity very, very much. And I encourage you, anytime you have a question or you hear about something and you want to know what the take is, call me. I will be more than happy. And if I don't know about it, I will find out about it. I do have a leadership position within the organization, and would love to be able to do that. Like I said, we're not given that opportunity very often. And there is so much misinformation and things that are attributed to us. Anytime you hear about anything, a book being removed or, something happening, it's attributed to Moms for Liberty. And it may or may not have anything at all to do with us. So.
Fantastic. Well, Brooke, thanks so much for being with us, and
Thank you.
we'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
You bet. Thank you so much.